Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. We are in section 4 of fitting for apparel design. In this section, we're going to be talking all about how to fit your garment. If you've been following along with my series, you know that I am in the middle of moving my studio, so there may be some interruptions here and there with my dog jumping in and out of frame, so apologies for the interruptions, but let's get started. So the fit process has 5 parts, and we're going to get into detail on each of those. The first is to receive the sample and check it in. The second is to review the sample. The third is to actually fit the sample onto a form before the fit session. Number 4 is the fit session. And number 5 is sending all of that information, all those comments and everything to the factory. So when we talk about fitting, what exactly are we talking about? Fitting is the act of taking the design that you've created, all of the specs, everything about it, and comparing it to what the factory has actually created for you. When you fit that garment on a fit form or a fit model, you're just confirming that the specs that you've requested from the factory are accurate or changing them if you need to. To create an amazingly consistent fit, your specs should always correlate back to your size chart. Once your sample comes in, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we check it in, especially if you are working with a ton of different designers and a ton of product. It's really important to keep everything organized. So I'm going to give you my tips for how I check in my samples. Some factories will have attached a tag onto the sample when they send it to you, and it usually includes the factory name, the date, and sometimes it'll have like some comments on it and stuff like that. And if they have not attached a tag, I definitely recommend attaching your own. That way it's so easy when you're just, kind of throwing samples around during a fit session, or when you're talking with your design team, that everything just stays organized and you don't have to worry about mixing up any of the samples. And here are some of the things that should be included on the sample tag. You want to make sure that you have the style number on the garment tag, as well as the factory name, the factory contact, the sample number. So if it's a prototype 1, 2, 3, if it's a PP, a jump size set, you want to make sure that you label that. And you want to be sure that you label if it's for men's, women's, children's, and sometimes that'll be evident in your style number. So it just kind of depends how you have your style numbers set up for your company. You also want to make sure that you have the dates on the sample tag. Typically when a factory sends the sample, if they have attached a tag, they will have a date on there, but I always recommend to also add the date that you checked in your sample on the sample tag. I also like to include who the technical designer is on that tag, or who is reviewing the sample if it's an assistant technical designer, for example. In the past, I have worked with companies who label their garment samples with a color-coded sticker, and this can be really helpful, especially if you have a full rack of samples and you just want to pull out the P1s, for example. So each color of each sticker represents like a P1, a P2, a PP, or whatever sample type it is. And you could use this color coding for in a different way as well. If you wanted to label all of the women's with a pink tag, or if you wanted to label all the men's with a blue tag. It's really up to you and how you want to keep your samples organized, because every single company and every single brand is so unique. So it really just depends what works best for you. It is also common practice in the industry to keep a sample tracker. And this is basically just a spreadsheet that's going to keep track of what samples have been checked in, what have been requested, which ones have comments already written for them, the dates of those. And the sample tracker is really used by the technical designer. And so you can organize your sample tracker. I mean, if you only have a few products that you're working with, you could have a single sample tracker that each person on your design team can access. But if you have a larger company, typically the sample tracker is going to be per technical designer. So each technical designer will have their own sample tracker, and they're in charge of keeping it updated, since they're going to be the one who's like pretty much using it and just checking off when they have received a sample from the factory or when they've requested one. Here's what should be included on your sample tracker. You want to be sure you have a copy of the technical sketch on that sample tracker, because it's just a great visual cue for making sure that you are looking at the correct sample and checking the correct sample in. It can get kind of confusing when you're working with style numbers, especially if the style numbers are pretty close. You can end up marking the wrong thing for the wrong style number just because the numbers are so close and you think you're checking the right one, but you're not. So it's really great to have that visual cue. I like to include the dates when the sample was requested and when it was received, the prototype number of each sample, so if it's a P1, a P2, a PP. Again, the style number you'll also want to include on your sample tracker. And then finally, I like to include the category of the garment, especially if you have a wide set of products. So if it's knits, if it's wovens, tops, bottoms, I like to include that, as well as the name of the technical designer, especially if you're working with several different sample trackers, in case someone else from the design team is looking at those, just so that they can easily figure out which product category they're trying to find a sample tracker for. And if you've been following along, you know that I will be launching the fitting DIY kit, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth about later in this video. But I just wanted to let you know that I will also be including a sample tracker in that kit. So if you are not wanting to create your own, there will be one in there for you. All right, so now we're at step 2 in the fit process, and that is that we are going to review our garment sample. And I'm not going to go into a ton of depth on this because I have a full tutorial on how to review your garment sample when it comes in already up on the blog, and I will link that down below. But just as a reminder, we'll kind of go through the basic steps of reviewing your garment when it comes in. You want to make sure that you are measuring your garment, and in that other video I have a little walkthrough of how to do that. I also have a measurement guide if you are unsure of how to measure your garments. It has 100 different specs and shows you how to measure each one up on my website, and I'll be sure to link that down below as well. Next, you want to compare the garment measurements to the specs that you requested initially, and then you want to highlight anything that's out of tolerance inside of your tech pack. Then you'll want to carefully check the construction and make sure there haven't been any construction issues that you need to notify the factory about. And we talked quite extensively about that in the last section. So head back to section 3 of this series if you want to know more about what you should be looking for when checking construction. And finally, you'll want to pull out the pattern that you've hopefully requested from your factory and double check it against the garment sample. And the reason for this is that your specs can be on, but your pattern shapes can be totally off. And I talk a lot about this in section 1 and section 3 of this series, so you can check out those as well. All right, so next in the process is putting the garment on the form, and you want to be sure that you are checking your specs before you do this because the fabric may stretch, you could rip a seam, so you really want to make sure you have that information first before throwing it on a form or on a person. I recommend throwing it on a form first because you can identify so many fit issues before going into the fit session. And this is a great way to determine if there are any sort of blaring issues, design lines that need to be moved, if the specs have really achieved the design intent of the garment. And I love to do this before I go into a fit session because it really gives me the time as a tech designer, or you if you're DIYing your tech design. It really gives you the opportunity to take your time and figure out why certain issues are happening. And that gives you the confidence in the fit session to really lead your team through the garment and talk about why things are happening and how to fix them. It is your job as the technical designer to really lead the team through the fit session and to understand the garment before you even walk into the fit session. So you need to have a holistic understanding of what is happening with the garment, and you need to be able to understand if there's any fit issues that are happening before you even get into the room with the rest of your design team. I like to make note of anything that I notice when I throw the garment on the form just directly in my tech pack in the review comment section. So if you've seen the template that I have on my website, it's just sort of like a little column off to the right hand side. And that's also where I will write any notes as I'm checking my specs and construction of the garment. So after you throw your garment on the form, there's some questions you want to ask yourself. Are there any blaring issues? Are there any design lines that need to be moved or changed? Do you like how the garment looks just overall? Is it reflecting the design intent that you had initially for the garment? And you'll also want to check things like, is the pocket wide enough for a whole hand to fit in there? Is the length long enough to achieve the design intent? And lastly, you'll want to look for any drag lines, because drag lines, as we learned earlier on in the series, are basically big arrows pointing to any issues with the fit of the garment. All right, so now we're in step 4, and this is where we're really getting into actually fitting the garment. And this will be when you have your fit session. So taking all the information that we have gathered from reviewing our sample and putting it on the form, we can start to relay that information to the rest of our design team. As a design team, we'll make decisions about if design lines need to move, if specs need to change, and just decisions about the overall design and fit of the garment. Typically, the members who attend the fit session are the technical designer and their assistant, if they have one, the merchandiser, the developer, and the designer. As I said before, it is the technical designer's responsibility to hold the fit session and lead the design team through the sample. Traditionally, the fit session happens in a separate room in the brand headquarters that is designated specifically for fit sessions. It needs to have a private area for the model to change, and it's also good to have a mirror in there so that you can kind of see the garment from all angles, as well as the fit model can also look at themselves when they put the garment on. The fit room needs to have a table that all of the design team members can sit at, as well as a area for the fit model to be and move around, and everybody needs to be able to see the garment all at one time. So typically using a large round table with a little bit of space at the end is best for a fit session. Inside of the fit room, you'll also want to have all of the tools that you might need for fitting. That could be scissors, tape, chalk, safety pins, and regular pins, and tape measures are all great things to have inside of the fit room. You'll also want to have your size chart and the fit model or your form's measurements as well, so that you can reference those when you're talking about the specs. In most cases, it's going to be recommended that you fit your garments on a fit model. And I disagree, and I'm going to tell you why. I've talked about this a little bit in previous series, but the main reason for not using a fit model on earlier prototypes is because it costs so much money. It costs a lot to book a model, especially if you only need to fit one item. You're gonna have to pay for a full hour. You may need to pay for their travel time, and it can be very hard to find a fit model that perfectly reflects your size chart. We talk about this in another series, so I don't want to get too in depth on it, but basically when you're creating your size chart and your grade and everything, you are fitting a fictional human. Every person has their own unique measurements and posture. Nobody is symmetrical. When you create your size chart, you are creating a false human. You want someone who is symmetrical. You can't make a garment that's asymmetrical. So as you can see, it can be very hard to find that in a person. So in order to create a super accurate fit, it's actually much easier and much more cost effective to do that on a fit form. And especially if you have a fit form that exactly reflects your size chart, which you should. Additionally, you've paid to have a custom fit form made probably for your brand, and so you should use it. And I definitely think that for those earlier prototypes, it totally makes sense, except for when you are fitting garments that it really depends on the mobility of the garment. In that case, you obviously want a person, a fit model who can move around in the garment so you can see the mobility of the garment. Some other reasons that I really like using a fit form before using a fit model is that it gives you the opportunity to have more flexibility in your fitting time. If a meeting needs to get moved around, you don't have to worry about a fit model being there or not being there. It allows you to give much more honest feedback without feeling like you're going to hurt a fit model's feelings, which in most cases fit models are pretty used to their body being analyzed, but it can be a little bit hard to talk about it in front of the person. So it definitely negates that. If you're just looking at a form, you can be really, really honest about how it looks on body. And again, as I said, it just saves you so much money and time. I also want to point out that as human beings, we are obviously drawn to other humans for certain reasons, whether it's their personality or their looks. you kind of have an emotional connection with people, whether that's good or bad. And that can definitely reflect on having a fit model too. If you really love your fit model, you may not notice some things that you would notice if you were fitting on just a fit form. Or if you don't like your fit model, you may feel like things don't look good, even though they fit fine. And that's just part of human nature. So I like to kind of get rid of that element as much as I can. And then you can always fit your final samples on a fit model. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that. You should absolutely do that. But it definitely takes out a bunch of that like middle time that you would be fitting on a fit model. That is, of course, just my personal opinion, and you are more than welcome to use a fit model or a fit form, whatever works best for you and your company. However, I will say that I always recommend having a fit form in the fitting with you so that you can compare the sample on body and on a form. If you're able to find a fit model who really reflects your size chart appropriately and is an experienced fit model, they can help a lot in fitting your garment. They can let you know if something's hard to get on and off, if the fabric is itchy, or if a seam is in a weird place. So that is definitely a reason that you may want to use a fit model. I also always like to have a form in the fit room, because if I am fitting a, let's say, P3 on a fit model, I can put the P2 on a fit form right next to the fit model, and that way we can kind of compare back and forth the changes that we made and have some hard evidence for why we made certain changes. I've said it so many times, but I'm gonna say it again. It is so easy to lose the design intent of the garment, especially during fit sessions, especially with so many different opinions in the room. So as a technical designer, it's really your responsibility to lead the team through the garment and to always be asking, does this follow the design that we had originally envisioned? Are we changing our original design to follow what the sample looks like? We really just always want to go back to what was our design intent. All right, so let's get back to the fit session. So what is the technical designer going to do? The technical designer is going to walk you through the sample by referencing the specs, the fit, the pattern, and walking you through what changes need to be made to make that garment fit better. There is a ton of flexibility in how you go through the sample, but I'm going to give you an example of what steps I follow. The first thing that the technical designer is going to do for the fit session is get the garment on the model or the fit form, and if they're able to, do it before the rest of the design team has gotten there. The technical designer is going to read off the style number just to make sure that everyone is referencing the correct notes. If it's not the first prototype, then the technical designer will go through what we changed last time. From the review that the technical designer has already done on the garment, they will talk about any issues that they have already seen and the changes that they want to make to correct those. Then what I like to do is I want to ask the design team what they think about the garment, what they think about the design intent, is it really reflecting what we had designed originally, and just what they think about the garment overall before changing any specs or going through any specs or anything like that. And in that point, if I notice that they're like, oh yes, I love that this is like loose fitting, even though that wasn't our original design intent, I'll make sure to make those notes about the specs first before I go through what's out of tolerance. So next, the technical designer will go through what specs are out of tolerance, and will typically also reference the chest, waist, and hip measurements, just so that we are comparing our specs to some landmark points. As the out of tolerance specs are read, the team will decide if they want to go back to spec or if they want to update the spec or what change that they want to make as a team. Next, the technical designer will reference any issues that they saw with the pattern from their own review and talk about any sort of pattern shapes that they want to change for the factory. After all that is done, the technical designer will want to take pictures of the garment on the body or on the form, the front, back, side, and then any detail shots that they need to take. If we were moving a design line or changing the shape of the collar, for example, we want a photo of that as well. And those photos are going to be used with our review comments in the tech pack. If you're using a fit model at this point, the rest of the steps can be completed on a fit form so that we are not using up the time that we have allotted for the fit model. The team will look at the garment next, just for design lines. So if we needed to move a bust seam, or change really just like the design of the garment, that can be looked at on the form. And finally, the technical designer will go back through and review the changes that we're making, and then we'll assign any of those changes. For example, if you have an illustrator that needs to update the sketch, or if the developer is changing the fabric or something along those lines, then those jobs will be assigned and everybody will make sure that they know what their responsibilities are. So that's it for the fit session, but I wanted to share some tips as well. The technical designer really needs to be confident in their ability, and they also need to just be the leader of the group. It can be super overwhelming, as I talked about, with so many different opinions in the room, but at the end of the day, the technical designer is the expert and they get the final call in spec changes. I recommend using safety pins to mark the garment if you're moving design lines, or if you are fitting the garment by taking in some of the excess. Using safety pins is not only safer for everybody in the fit session and for the fit model, but it also makes sure that those pins don't fall out. You can, of course, use chalk or form tape to mark those design lines, but just remember that those things aren't always permanent, and especially if your garment is getting thrown around or reviewed by several different people, those marks can go away. So definitely using safety pins is the most permanent way that you can mark your sample. The technical designer is going to be recording all of these changes directly on the tech pack. I always record my changes on the fit review page and then enter all of that information into the computer once I'm done. But if you are working with an assistant designer, you're probably going to want them to also have the same information. So that is where a fit sheet can come in really handy. And the other members on your design team may appreciate having a fit sheet as well. And that's basically just going to be a sheet with a technical sketch of the garment and some areas to take notes. I'll also be including a fit sheet in my fitting DIY kit if you don't want to create your own. If, as a technical designer, you're having any doubts about changing specs, always just go back to your size chart and your fit form measurements, and those can give you some idea of if you are in the ballpark of the right spec. It's better to err on the side of something being too large rather than too small, because when the new sample comes in, you can always dart out that excess with pins, but if it comes in too small, it's definitely hard to guesstimate how much needs to be added. I recommend that you always fit your garments in tandem with the garments that they will be worn with or over. So if you are fitting a button-up shirt, you want to make sure that the form or the fit model is wearing jeans or pants of some kind, or if you're fitting outerwear, you might want a fleece underneath or a base layer. So this last tip that I have, I see so often, and even outside of people that I work with, I see it a lot, especially on Instagram, of designers kind of sharing their work and their process. The designer or the merchandiser may want to try on the sample themselves after it's been fitted on the model. And whenever possible, as a technical designer, you want to avoid this. And the reason for that is that the merchandiser or designer, even if they are technically that size, that is not the standard for which you are fitting your garment. You are fitting your garment of the standard of your size chart, of your fit form, and you've gone through extensive research to find a fit model that directly reflects that if you're using one. And what usually happens in these cases, it's, you know, the designer or the merchandiser is like, oh, I just want to throw it on. I just want to see how it feels and how it looks. But then it becomes almost a second fitting and making changes based on their body type. And it isn't always reflective of your size chart. And so then you're making changes that are not consistent with your sizing. For samples that are later on in the process and are about to go into production, so if you're working with your pre-production sample, I definitely recommend doing a wear test, and that's basically just where someone in that size in your office needs to wear the garment around for a day, a few days, and just determine if there's any sort of overly annoying things or weird things about the garment. If there's like itchy seams or fabric or something catches when they're wearing the garment or something like that, that's when you'll be able to determine if the wearability is really up to the standards of your brand. And of course, I also recommend that you do a wash test on your samples before going into production to make sure that your garments can stand up to the washability standards that you set for your brand. Again, later on in the process, you'll be fitting size sets, and these fittings don't need to be as in-depth, but you definitely need to fit all of the sizes of your size run, unless it is a style or fabric that you have already worked with before and you're pretty confident in the sizing and grade for that fabric. I definitely recommend always fitting every single size and just confirming that your grade is correct. For size sets, you can fit your garments on a fit form if you have extended sizing in your fit forms, or you can use fit models. All right, and then lastly, the final step of the fit process is to take all of the information that we've gathered from fitting our garment and reviewing it and put that into review comments to send to the factory to request our next sample. And I'm not going to go into a ton of depth on this because I already have a full tutorial on how to write your review comments and exactly how I structure mine. So I will definitely link that down below. In my blog post, I have some illustrations that walk you through how to identify fit issues and some common fit issues that you might find and how to correct them. So I'll let you guys check out the full blog post to see those instead of going over them on camera, because I don't want this video to get too long and I think it just makes more sense to go view the illustrations there. So I'll leave that link down below as well. As I talked about earlier in this video, I am launching the Fitting DIY Kit, which has everything you need to be able to fit your garments appropriately. And if you want to save 20%, you can sign up for my email list, and I will leave that link down below. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that this gave you a really good basic foundation for fitting your garments. Next week, we're going to be getting into blocks and how they are going to help you create a consistent fit for your brand. If you found this tutorial helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could share, like, subscribe, whatever it is that you want to do, however you want to share it. I really appreciate it. And I will see you guys next week for section 5.